we are just so glad to see him. I kind of feel like that I've known John and Val for a long time. And I think that is because I've listened to what John had preached and his ordination for I don't know how many times, and I'm trying, let me just tell you, we're going to try to keep this short, right? Because when you ask John a question, right, when he's going to go to answer, he starts with the book of Genesis and ends up in Revelation, right? And he connects them all together. And when at the end of question, and you look at it and you listen to it, they say, yeah, all of them lined up, So anyway, we're going to try to keep this short. So if you would, both of you, would you please just take a few moments and give a little bit of a background about yourself. You can tell us about your education. You can tell us about view of eschatology, right? And we can start with you, John, and then with Val.
Thought I got lucky. She was holding the mic.
Yeah.
So, hello. Shalom, shalom. I grew up in West Virginia, so not too far away, just on the other side of the state. Oh, I see a West Virginian back there, I'm guessing, raising their hand. Where are you from?
Preston County.
Okay, I'm from Wayne. So, almost Kentucky, but still almost heaven. And so grew up there. Grew up in a liturgical church when I was really young, and was led to faith by a local youth pastor in Canova, which is the town I grew up in. Probably, if you guys know who Michael W. Smith is, the singer, Christian singer. He grew up in the same town, actually, the same church I went to in high school. So that's the town. We're all from the same area there.
We won't hold any of that against you.
Right? Yeah. They still think Secret Ambition is an awesome song there. I'm kidding. But I grew up there, was mentored by a man of God there that was, he was a Dallas grad, actually fresh out of seminary at the time, and really mentored me and a couple of my friends in the faith. I ended up going to Moody for more training, so I moved to Chicago when I was 19 and went to school there and double majored in theology and in Jewish studies. Wound up living in Israel and going to Hebrew University of Jerusalem as well for Hebrew, and I was working for Chosen People Ministries back then. So I was doing ministry there and in Chicago with that. So I was a Hebrew teacher in Chicago at a congregation called Adat Tikva. It's actually the oldest Messianic congregation in North America, and used to be called First Hebrew Christian Church of Chicago back in the turn of the last century. And it was founded by Presbyterians that were evangelizing to the Jewish people. And so that was pastored by Roy Schwartz. He's recently retired, and met my wife actually, 4 days after I got back from Israel. And she was she cut hair on campus. She was a cosmetologist and then turned Moody student. And one of my friends was on next in line to get his hair cut, and I crossed his name out as if he wasn't coming, and then did a write-in so that I could go get my hair cut and meet her. So, and we were married. We dated 10 months. We're engaged 10 months, so we were married 20 months later, something like that. So, I'm terrible with dates. So went there, and we've worked in the church, various churches throughout time, and went into the outdoor industry for about 15 years while working in the church at the same time as well, and interim preaching, helping set up church governments at a couple of churches that we've worked in, and so that's me. I'm a student at Schaefer right now. I'm a little over halfway done, and so plan to finish my master's and torture myself and hopefully go for a PhD later. But yeah, that's me. This is my wonderful wife, and we have 3 daughters. The eldest is right over here on the front row. This is Brianna.
Hi, Brianna.
So I'm Valerie, And
Before you go on, if I may, you know what John just said is a little bit in dispute. You're going to hear it from Valerie. You know what I mean? You know, the way they met and all that. By the way, John is a Messianic Jew, and he was actually being sought after to be the professor at Schaeffer Seminary for Hebrew Studies. Right? So,
Yeah, a TA for that right now. I forgot that. Yeah.
right.
so I'm Valerie, and I'll tell you the real way that John and I met. We went to Moody, and I was studying for a test that was very, very important. And all of a sudden, this very, very loud group comes, and they're literally singing and dancing their way down the hallway. And I was so upset because I'm like in the student center trying to study, and here comes this loud group. And then I looked over, and there was this really cute guy, so I decided I'd stick around for a little bit longer. And then when he did come down and cross his friend's name off at my hair salon, I was closing at the time, and I saw him like, oh, that's that guy that I saw coming down. Okay, I can stay open for one more. So that's my version of how we met. But we've been married 16 years. We have 3 beautiful girls. Brianna is about to turn 13. My other 2 are with the kids, and so Alana's going to turn 10 next week, and Kira will turn 8 in September. I'm from California myself, and so John and I came from opposite ends of the country and met in the middle, and we've lived everywhere in between and gotten to see God's beauty in every possible way that there is. Our girls are deeply connected to West Virginia. It's probably their favorite place. They can probably recite you most John Denver songs on command. And they are not picky eaters because I am from, just from my family, my dad is East Indian and grew up on the island of Fiji. And they immigrated here, and he met my mom, who is very, very Caucasian, and her parents are from the South. So, and then John grew up in West Virginia, but you know, he is also part Jewish, and so we have a very wide variety of food that gets cooked in our house. So being a picky eater is not really an option for my kids. They like anything from curry to sweet tea.
Curry with sweet tea.
Curry with sweet tea, why not? Blend them all together.
Now, I'm pretty sure she wasn't putting a plug to be invited in for dinner, but what she was telling you that if they are invited, anything that you put in front of them, they'll eat.
Exactly.
We're hobbits.
Yeah. But it's really interesting, you know. But you have been in the mission field as well, right?
Yes, I've been blessed to do some mission work in India and Costa Rica and Mexico, all of those before I went to Moody. And then at Moody, I worked with a group called the South Asian Friendship Center, and I got to spend that time doing a Bible study with 4 teenage Muslim girls that their parents would let them come to Bible study as a way of helping them with their English. And so that was a big blessing to us as well. And then in the churches that we've worked at, John and I have done worship together. He's led youth groups, done a lot, obviously, with preaching and helped building up the church governments. And I've been a children's director.
Great, thank you so much. And I think it is interesting, you know, John being Jewish and you being from India, and I'm here from Iran, right? I mean, international, right? Yeah, you go Israel, couple of countries over is Iran, couple of countries over is India.
Well, because my
keeping the
dad's
peace.
Indian and my mom is white, I can pass for anything. So John actually thought that I was Persian when we
Yeah.
met.
Yeah, we are check marking all the boxes, right? Yeah.
There you go.
Now, both of you are obviously pre-tribulational,
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
and go ahead, you can talk about it a little bit.
Yes, we are very much pre-tribulation, millennial reign of Christ, obviously dispensational. I, for obvious, both biblical and selfish reasons, believe in a future for the people of Israel. So I do believe that when the Bible says Israel, it means Israel, the Jewish people, the 12 tribes of Jacob. I don't think they were lost or any of these conspiracy theories that you hear about over the past really 2 centuries, spanning from Mormonism to some of the Islamic teachings that the 12 tribes weren't the 12 tribes, it was Ishmael, all of that, just expressions of replacement theology, to be honest, right? And so I believe the 12 tribes are the 12 tribes. Part of that is the revelations of God were given to them, right, as a people. But at the same time, being part of Israel or acknowledging Israel as Israel means that the persecution that you see over the past 17 centuries, well, more than that, but really the harsh persecution from the last 17 centuries is part of the nation of Israel living abroad, right? So when we say a literal biblical prophecy of the nation returning in unbelief, and that is a precursor to the coming of the Mashiach, of the Messiah, part of that understanding is when they lived in the diaspora, anytime they're exiled from the land, they have to deal with the Gentile nations being harsh to them, right? That is the book of Esther, right? And so this is that Genesis through Revelation thing that he's talking about. But part of acknowledging that, you're not acknowledging it not just in the eschaton, but in the past, right? Of the promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those are unchanging, they're eternal. The covenants made, apart from one covenant that was conditional, the other ones are Brit Olam, covenants of eternity, or literally eternal covenants. We believe all of that. And so...
Thank you so much for that. Now, it's... we are very delighted for you to be here, right? After we found out that, this might be a possibility for you guys, we kind of were pinching ourselves if this is really true. So I want to know from you guys, what led you come to Fellowship Chapel? Obviously, you are very accomplished in many regards in your education, your understanding of the Bible. You are very accomplished in your current job. So, we are just this little church in Jarrettsville, We are the little lighthouse next to the firehouse, as our former pastor used to say. So what led you to come to Fellowship Chapel?
So honestly, we didn't know much about Fellowship before we started reading about the church on the website. And I was telling you guys at the interview, like sometimes you'll see churches with a great doctrinal statement, but functionally they have issues, right? They have a strange church government, or they believe in a future for Israel, but the pastor thinks he's a bishop, or something like that, And so we were going back and forth, and when we were reading about Fellowship, we were like, this group has a solid leadership foundation, and they're doctrinally sound. And one of the things that led me, apart from prompting from our pastor in Connecticut, is strongly encouraging us. If you guys know Pastor Dave Roseland at Preston City Bible Church, strong encouragement from him. That's where the ordination was held, is at that church. Apart from that, one of my professors at Schaefer, who's not with us this morning, was Charlie Clough. And I knew, I hate to single him out. Well, I don't hate to single him out for this. Oh, good. Okay. But I knew Charlie went here, and I knew that Charlie, as a very doctrinally sound man, and would not put him or his wife in a church that was unsound in its ecclesiology. And so his testimony as a professor was one of the motivating factors. I looked at Valerie and said, well, Charlie and his wife go here.
We had to pinch ourselves too.
Yeah, so we said, and obviously when I first applied, he was on the search committee and was with the groups talking and all of that. And so it was a huge blessing in that respect. And so just like at Moody or even at Schaefer now, you go to the professors and ask the questions. I didn't have to ask the questions. He was already here. As to, you think this is a sound church? Well, he wouldn't put his own family here if that wasn't the case. And so part of that was trusting him as a leader and as a man of God and as a scholar, as a Bible scholar. If you guys have sat with Charlie, he and I together can go on till the sun comes up when it comes to the scriptures. But all of those things in summation were testimonies to this being a solid body of believers.
Yeah.
And so
That is so wonderful. And but if I recall correctly, that your calling about being a pastor really, if I can use that word, evolved a little bit at a time, because you really had different ideas what you wanted to do, and then you were encouraged by your professors, by your friends, by your pastor. You want to share a little bit about that?
Sure, and that's a very good point. I knew I wanted to teach, but my logical flow in my mind was, well, since I like to teach, it should probably be in the classroom. That was a lot of my experience. So in my mind, for a lot of years, I thought I was going to be teaching in a Bible college or teaching in a local seminary. And the fact that I was working in a secular industry at the same time allowed me to volitionally work in the church at will, right? Without having any kind of real vocational compensation, so to speak, but we loved it. But we always thought our end result would be teaching in some kind of an institution. Over the past year and a half, Pastor Roseland, who's the dean at Schaefer as well, he was prompting me. He said, "John, you should really look at teaching in the church." And he had to kind of reason with me on, every time God has you teaching, does he have you teaching in the classroom, or is it predominantly in a church setting? I said, okay, it's in a church setting. Every time that you teach in the church, is it usually in front of a congregation, or is it in a small group? I'm like, well, yeah, here recently it's been predominantly in the congregation. And it's almost like the Pharisees saying, or think of Gamaliel in Acts 5, where he says, if God wants this to happen, it's going to happen. If you fight against it, you're going to fight against the Lord. And Dave said, what is God empirically telling you that he wants you to do? And I said, okay, so you're telling me that I'm being dumb about this. And he said, yes, in a very loving way, yes, you need to be doing this. And so I said, okay, let's go. And so that's what started the process toward ordination and studying and preparing for that. But determining God's will for our lives, there's not I didn't have a vision come out of heaven or a light kick on. If a light did kick on, it's because somebody flipped a switch. Is that the Lord revealed himself in his scriptures and in what he had presented to me throughout times through what we would call divine appointments, or providentially speaking, that God is even sovereign in the times of us volitionally thinking that we need to do something else. And he still guides us, right? And that was the key thing about it.
Now, with that regard, Val, let me ask you a question. That, as they say, a woman's castle is her home, right? And what do you think about John becoming a pastor? I mean, making a transition from the civilian world into the position that he's going to be having, Lord willing, as a pastor. Is that unsettling with you? How do you look at it? What are some of the issues or characteristics that you see in John that you think, no, this is God's will for us?
Yeah, so I feel like since the day I met John, it was very evident that he needed to be in a place where he was teaching the scriptures. And so that's kind of always been an end goal. And the last, however many years of working in a secular context was just kind of a holdover to get to that. John is his spiritual gift primarily is as a teacher. And he's a very good Bible teacher. He's also a lifelong learner, and God has put in him a true love and a passion for learning. And so while, I think he has been gifted with knowledge and wisdom and discernment, he also still really wants to learn. So that process continues, throughout the course of our lives. And I love seeing that in him. I think God doesn't waste anything. And so even the time that John has spent in the corporate world, I think has given him other trainings that the Lord intends to use for his own purpose and his own glory. And he's really grown in areas of administration and managing people and, all of those other things that he's had to do in that kind of a context.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we're going to owe Pastor Dave a dinner, for what he did. But one of the things, if you have watched that ordination video, at one point they are talking about different things, and John makes a point about that, and Pastor Dave turns around and says, do you really think that's what it is? What's your idea of that? So with John, and I tested him for that, right, when we had the interview. What you would do, you would tell him that certain chapter in the Bible, and he'll tell you what's in it. I'm thinking, now, wait a minute, how does that work? But he has such a great memory of doing that. With that said, we are living in a very perilous time. Situation in our nation is really challenging. Every day there is a new doctrine, there is a new issue that's coming up, all this wokeism and all that. As a pastor, how would you deal with that?
One idea at a time.
Yeah.
You have to. It's actually twofold. One is presenting a solid biblical paradigm, and which is different. I would say it's very different from a solid theological paradigm. One is to communicate. If I say I'm going to communicate a solid theological paradigm, I'm going to sit down and take you through the Trinity and what Christians believe, right? So foundations of doctrine, usually in a propositional statement of some kind. A solid biblical paradigm is teaching Christians how to interact with the scriptures, right? So that even though you're going to get solid theology, you have to be able to stand on your own 2 feet when you're not here. Does that make sense? And so if you can't handle the scriptures, but you have a sound theology, you can never answer the question of why. Is that making sense? Okay. So that's the biggest thing, is developing a solid biblical paradigm to where as you present a sound theology, you're not just using the Bible as a proof text. And we're going to talk about that later at the sermon, but proof text is like the proof verses, the verse citations at the end of a doctrinal statement, right? So not just for that is being able to exegete the scriptures on site when someone asks. And that's the responsibility not just of your elders and the pastor, but as believers, it's the job of the pastor and the elders to teach not just the truth, but how to get there, right? That's the most important thing, because someday the Lord could take me home tomorrow, or take all your elder board home tomorrow. Someone has to step up in their place in order to lead the congregation, right? And that's the key thing, is you have to be able to handle the scriptures well, on top of having your household in order. That's the first thing. The second thing is then addressing each of these ideas as they come to light in the general public, and there's nothing new under the sun, right? And so the things we're seeing in America, you can point to just about any nation on the planet, and they've gone through an era, whether it's 10 years or 100 years long, of having something similar occur there, right? And so that is one thing that is comforting, is that humans, we're pretty bad about propagating the same lies over and over again. And we wait until we think the world's ignorant, and I say we collectively as humanity, right? We wait until the world is ignorant enough that the devil can give us a foothold, and we'll propagate the lie a second time, maybe packaged in a different wrapping paper and bow, right? But that is comforting in the sense that we can probably find in Scripture where the saints had to deal with that in eras past. And but if we don't have a solid footing in the Scriptures, we won't know to look, right? So that's my main.
That's wonderful. With regard to that, Fellowship Chapel for past 30 plus, well, I would say about 37, 8 years now, maybe even longer than that, has really emphasized on the life of Christ in a believer, and that how our existence, how our everyday living really is a reflection of who we internally are as individuals. So how would you deal with the life of Christ in a believer, and how would you encourage the congregants to be involved with various evangelistic events? Because at Fellowship Chapel, we have tent meetings, we have Awana, which I know you have been involved with for a long time with Awana, right? That's so great. And we have had outreach to the community. We invite sometimes the local politicians to come when we have a tree lighting ceremony and that sort of a thing. How would you combine those two together, the life of Christ in a believer and the mission that God has called us to?
The life of Christ in the believer, or how we should live in light of following Christ. I think Paul does a very good job in Thessalonians when he's talking about the coming kingdom and how to live in light of the coming kingdom. We're not called to live a loud life. And that's something that, unfortunately, some of the market metrics, and I work in believe me, I work in a $1 billion company in the marketing department. So what I'm saying here is that I can very much tell you when there's parallels between churches doing this and a secular business doing this, even if the church makes a semantic shift in their terminology that they use. But a market metrics-driven evangelism markets Jesus as a product. Does that make sense? And the moment that you don't get consumer buy-in, what do companies do? And we do this. I have to do this because I'm a product manager. So currently I have to either change the message with the marketing department, the branding people, or I have to change the product. That's dangerous when you're dealing with the God of the Bible. You don't want to repackage God, right? You want to present God. Yeah, we're called to present God true, right? So these events, on top of encouraging believers and showing our sense of community, our community to the outside world that's not a member here, we have to be able to show who our God is to these people on a one-on-one basis, even more so than a group dynamic. Does that make sense? The group dynamic, it'll come and go at the end of the event. But those events should really prompt questions from those people as to why do they love each other so much? Do they see that? You know, what prompts them to come in and ask who our God is? And they may come and say, man, you guys have a great sense of community. Well, let me tell you why that is. But on the flip side of that, from those events of showing community solidarity in Christ, Paul says to live a quiet life, offend no one, work with your hands, right? These are not things that are very attractive as far as a marketing standpoint goes, right? And that might seem boring at first glance, but the reason Paul says it is he's trying to show that we live a peaceful life in light of the coming kingdom. So in light of all the persecution and everything that's coming, with the great departure from truth before the rise of the Antichrist, like these things, Paul says, live quiet. Live in a quiet community, work with your hands, love one another. Jesus' commandment, love one another, the new commandment I give you. None of those things are loud. But they're impactful, but they're not loud, right? And so we're encouraged to proclaim Christ boldly, but that could be in your own living room. To proclaim Christ boldly doesn't necessarily mean with your volume. It means with such conviction that you know it to be true, and you know that you know that you know that you know, right? Amen. And so reconciling those are the things that the 12 did unto their deaths, minus John. But even John was exiled and boiled alive, and I mean he had a very hard life after the Lord departed from this earth.
Right. And Val, with that regard, do you have any concern that being the wife of a pastor, and what would your involvement be within the church?
No, I don't think I have too many concerns about being the wife of the pastor. That, one of the things that was said at John's ordination, was the pastor who was overseeing it, said, well, all these years, these have been some pretty cool years, so it's a pretty cool thing that you've gotten to do out here in the secular world. And John's response to that, I think, was perfect, was, well, okay, but this is better. Being in the place that the Lord has you to be and serving him for his glory is better. And there's I think, a blessing that comes from the Lord for being obedient to being in the place that he has you to be, whatever that may be. And for John and for our family, I think that a pastorate is that place. And so I don't have, any kind of reservations or fears in that, in the sense that I know the God that I serve, and I know that he is faithful. And so I don't anticipate having true needs that he doesn't meet, because he always has.
Thank you. That's wonderful. After the second interview, and I was thinking, okay, what are my thoughts about John? And a few things came to my mind, and the same thing with you. Ant, worker bee, energizer bunny. I mean, that's what I thought, right? So, because of all the things that he said and all the things that John and both Val have been involved, I said, how did he accomplish that in their life? But that was just amazing. So now the question is that if you become a pastor, you want to continue, as you said earlier, finish your master's, right? And I think you are taking only 18 credits. I mean, that's it, right? When normally people take 4 or 6 and only 18 credits, right? And then you want to go for your PhD. And how would you be able to accomplish all this while being at the church, being a senior pastor, and leading a congregation in all the ministries in every level?
Well, as far as time, and those of you who work normal jobs and maybe go to Schaefer, they can be counterintuitive to one another, ideologically speaking, or your splitting of time, your mental time, right? Having to switch gears. And as a student, you probably get what I'm saying, right? You have to come home, you have to switch gears, you have to turn it off, you have to turn on, you have to put your theology hat on and go to school, right? At Moody, we didn't really have that. I mean, I worked a couple of jobs, but they were on campus to pay for like room and board and those sorts of things. I was a cook. Don't ask me to cook for you. She's better.
She eats anything.
I can make a mean cheeseburger.
Maybe that's how she goes. Maybe that's how she learned to eat everything, right?
It's what it is, yeah. She's like, let me do it. But no, I mean, being able to work, and this is, I'm just being plain with you all, but being able to work in an occupation where your education complements that what you're doing throughout the day is a blessing in my mind. Because you actually get to apply on a daily, hourly basis that what you're learning. And we get to do that in the household right now. I mean, my oldest daughter, God bless her, she's studying Hebrew with me right now. We started homeschooling her in Hartford, and now they're back in public school, but she didn't get to quit Hebrew when she left homeschool. And so we get blessings in the household for things like that, but being able to apply it in a congregational setting, I sure hope so. As Valerie was saying earlier, I don't think God's wasting anything. It's just a question of when and what facet, right? And that's true of anybody that's going to Schaefer right now. God is training you to do something. And most likely it's going to be in the position of leadership, teaching, or preaching, or something. You're going to wind up leading somewhere. By default, if you volitionally enrolling, you are getting geared up to do that in some kind of a facet. And I won't stop you. I'll probably push you a little harder because I'll be in the trench with you.
Yeah, that is so wonderful. One of the regrets that I have that I didn't teach my kids to speak Farsi, And with Iran being in the news nowadays for past 40 years, actually, I thought that, wow, what a mistake that was, But So that is so wonderful. Now, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, John, but there is a lot of churches, if you will, that when they hire a senior pastor, they are, in their mind, they are hiring a CEO, right? They are looking for somebody that it is going to be doing everything, organizing everything, and he's going to be managing everything, and just down the line, like, because they have a model of a corporation, that is how they think about it, right? And you talked about a little bit about the church and about how we operate here and the method of our governance and that type of a thing. So tell us a little bit about, as a pastor, how you would conduct yourself. What would be your way of leading the church in terms of ministries, in terms of administration, in terms of evangelism and all those things? How do you see your role?
Well, I mean, the role of a vocational pastor is that you get to devote twice your time from the other elders in the affairs of the church, especially if they work during the day, right? And I get that. I've operated in that role. I've operated in the elder chair role where I have a full 60-hour job and still working in the church. And at one time when I was doing that, I was working an international job and having to manage things from actually from Spain. On occasion, I would be in Spain discussing things with the church back in Connecticut. But that being said, modern technology and being able to communicate with the elder board, yeah, I'm all for that. I mean, it's no different than projecting this sermon up on YouTube so we can edify believers who are at home or they don't know the church exists, but it triggers them to come here. It motivates them with scriptures. Maybe they're 1,000 miles away and they're just getting God's word through schmoozing on YouTube. I'm all for that, and having those mediums that the first century didn't have, that's fine, right? They're mediums of communication. A first century church model, that's a different question, right? And so the first century church was not a commercialized marketing metrics entity. It wasn't. And if you read the book of Acts, find me a spot where where your metrics of performance were measured by the 12 in Jerusalem as a board of directors or something crazy. It's not there, right? And so that's the first thing we have to acknowledge, that it's not there. What is there in every instance is Paul or Peter or one of the 12 teaching that Jesus is the Messiah, finding the educated men in the scriptures, whether they were Jewish or they were educated Gentiles who had been learning in the synagogue. They were Gentiles that were attending synagogue. They knew the scriptures. And this is a time when you didn't have a personal copy of the Bible. Remember that. I mean, that's few and far between. You had to go to shul and pull the scroll off the shelf, right? And so during that period, those educated men, Paul brought them up in the teachings of the Messiah, the way he was probably brought up by the 12 or fellow believers in those 3 years that he wandered off and disappears off the map. So he comes to faith, scales fall off his eyes, and he disappears for 3 years. And he even says, I went off into Arabia. Well, he probably went to study because he was educated by the most learned man. The president of the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem was Gamaliel. So he was being reared by the most educated man in Jerusalem next to the high priest. And he said, I still had to go off and learn. And so that tells me that the educated men are meant to operate together in concert with one another. And what is different from a corporate model is that they're not a board of directors. They are supposed to be the most learned men here who can help govern as a group the will of God for the congregation. As far as being prudent with finances, I love Excel.
Yeah.
Microsoft Excel is my friend. Around tax season, it's awesome. But being prudent with finances, all of those modern tools, they're tools, right? But the core ecclesiological model has to be the model of the first century, is that eventually, if these seats get too full, we need to find a place to plant a church. That's what they did. Mm-hmm. They planted a congregation. They trained up a new teacher to go and shepherd the people more locally in that community. That's what they did. And I hope that's the goal here, is that if this church ever it gets too full, saints, we need to train up men to go and set up another place and send them off and support them when they need it. That's what Paul also did. He says, I robbed other churches to come serve you. In other words, you guys didn't have the money, and I knew that for me to be able to feed myself and come down and teach you, but these Greeks up here, they handed some stuff off so I could come see you, right? So we should be able to empower that as well as we move along. But keeping that keeps us humble. We're not here to get huge and be mega, right? We're here to set up another congregation that can be shepherded by men who can pay attention to everyone that's there. So,
Thank you so much for both of you. Do you have a final comment you'd like to make? If not, that's perfectly fine.
now that you've won the Super Bowl, where are you going?
Yeah.
Don't say Disneyland.
No, I would just like to say thank you for the way that this congregation has been so welcoming to us and to our family. I happen to adore my girls immensely. They are young, exuberant children, and when we told them that this was the church that we were coming back to this weekend, that was very exciting for them because of the love and the excitement and the hugs that have already been shared. So I just wanted to thank you guys for
We
loving on
thank
us
you so
already.
much. We thank you. We hope that you would change your view about Tennessee Titans and become a Ravens fans, right? Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Let's give them a hand of applause. I'm going to close us with a word of prayer, and we give them some time to refresh before John would speak during the service. Father, we are just so grateful for your love, your mercy, your grace, and Lord, the things that you do in life for each and every one of us. I look at my own life, and I see what you have accomplished, things that never would have turned into the heart of man. I couldn't have put it together, but you in your mercy just so worked all the details of life. And I know that's the case here with both John and Val as you're leading them and you're leading us. Give us a united heart that, Father, we may give you all the honor, praise, and glory, for it is in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Thank you so much.